the other piece of this. What is public domain? Public domain is quite simply a work that is no longer covered by copyright law, either because the copyright has expired, although that doesn't happen too much in America anymore, or the author has released their copyright on the product or on the work. That basically means it is owned by the public at large. You can take it, you can do whatever you want to with it. There are no restrictions other than U.S. law on it. When you have a project, should you open source your project? You know, a lot of people, myself included, often will say yes. But you have to think, is this something that is good for your project? So these are the things that you really should think about. What are your goals in releasing this project? Can those goals be satisfied by an open source license? Or could they be satisfied by other licenses? If your goal is to make money, probably an open source license isn't the right choice there. Could be, but probably not. How tightly do you want to control your projects? Once you have released something under an open source license, you do release a lot of control over it. A copyrighted work, you are the only one who can change it. The copyright owner is the only one who can change that work and make changes to it and release those changes. Once you put it out under open source, that is no longer true. Anyone who receives that under that open source license has those rights as well, subject to the stricture of the particular license you put it under. One of the big questions I ask when people ask me about, do I want to open source a project, is, do you have the time and skills and drive to finish that project? I know that I don't. I have more half-completed projects, quarter-completed projects than you could believe. So some of the projects that I put out under open source were simply because I'm done with them. I don't want them anymore. Somebody else take them wherever they need to go. I don't care anymore. Okay, so you've decided to open source your project. Great. What does that mean? What do you have to do? What do you get out of it? Benefits from open sourcing your project. I kind of covered these earlier. You can bring in a wider selection of skills. And I'm a decent programmer. But that doesn't mean that I can write documentation. Trust me, I can't write documentation. It doesn't mean that I hate writing user interfaces. I absolutely hate it. I like solving the problem. I hate writing user interfaces. If I want to release a project that needs a user interface, I can open source it and someone else can write the UI. I don't have to deal with it. Increases the rate of improvement. I only have so much time to work on my projects. Not a huge amount anymore. If I want to see this project go somewhere, a lot of times by open sourcing it, if it's something that other people are interested in, they'll pick it up and run with it. And it'll go a lot further, a lot faster. This is a big one for me. This is one of the reasons that I am personally into open source. When I was learning, I learned very informally. I went out, I found what would now be called open source or free software, and I sat down and I read it and I learned from it. I really contribute a lot of my success, both professionally and personally, to the fact that people open sourced their products, and I was allowed to learn from them. So it is very important to me to give that same thing back to other people. A lot of people like the helping others with skill sets. If I have a skill and I want to write a piece of code or build something to solve that, and there are other people who do not have those skills, do not have the time, I can hand this out and help them solve their problems. It's a helping others kind of mentality. Have the project live beyond your interest. Like I said, I've got projects out there that I worked on, I wrote, they did what I needed them to do, I moved on, I don't care anymore. There are people out there still developing some of the products that I started. They want to take it other directions, they want to take it further, they want to do other things with it. I don't care, I'm done. And it would have sat on my hard drive and rotted. And no one else would have had the benefit of the, as my wife can tell you, many hours that I spent solving that problem. And once again, get back to the community. You know, we are all in a community together. In this case, we're all brought together by a common interest. And that is true of all communities. by open sourcing your project, you are giving back to that community. You are helping the other people who have similar interests and therefore, in some way, close to you. How do you plan to open source your project? Once you've decided to do it, what do you need to do to say that your project is open source? First thing you got to do is decide, what am I opening up? If I have a bunch of stuff that I've worked on, and I want to open source part of it, what do I do? Which parts do I want to open source? That's your first decision. Do you want to do the whole thing? Do you want to just do the specific part? Once you've decided what you're going to do, you need to choose how you want to distribute it. What rights do you want to give others? What rights do you want to reserve for yourself? That leads you to go choose a license. We'll talk about that in a second. Then you need to apply the license to the project. How do you do that? I've decided I'm going to open source my project foo. How do I actually say this is open source? How do I communicate that to the world? And then once I've done that, I have to distribute it. I can open source everything I want. If it's sitting on my hard drive and no one else ever sees it, I just wasted my time figuring out how to do that. Okay, so if we've already decided what to open, we need to decide what license are we going to distribute under. There's a couple different licenses you can choose from. One of my favorites and one of the most common in the world is the GPL. It's by far not the only license. There's an LGPL. There's the Apache license. There's the BSD license, the X11 license, Mozilla Public License. Forget it. There are a lot of licenses to choose from. The OSI has approved 67 open source licenses. You just saw all 67. The Free Software Foundation has approved 87 free software licenses. There's some overlap between them, but that's still a lot of licenses to choose from. The way you choose a license, what do you want from a license? Do you want to basically say, here, take it, I don't care anymore, I don't care what you do with it, use it commercially, don't use it commercially? If you make a derived work, does it have to be open source? Can it be closed source? Those kind of questions you have to ask. How do I want people to acknowledge that I was the original author? How do I want things to work here? Then you have to go look at the licenses that provide the protection that you want. Like I said, there's a lot of licenses. You don't have to look at every single one because a lot of them cover basically the same things. We'll talk about some of the more common ones in just a moment here. Like I said, there's only a few that are going to cover most of your situations. First one we're going to talk about is the GPL and the LGPL. These are extremely common licenses. These are free software licenses. So these are defined by the Free Software Foundation. It's the license used by the Linux kernel, which therefore makes it one of the most used licenses in the face of the earth, just out of the box. One of its requirements that sets it apart is that it requires any derived work or anything that works that is combined with that license to be licensed under the GPL. Not just open source, not just free software, must be licensed under the GPL. It means if I write something, release it. I knew I shouldn't have put the back button, it's so easy to hit. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. If I write something and release it under the GPL, and you want to take that software and combine it with something that you've written, by agreeing to use my GPL software, you have agreed to release what you've written under the GPL. This has led a lot of people to call it a viral software. Most notably, Microsoft has often done this because they say that it consumes anything that it touches. I don't feel that it's that bad. By entering into the agreement to use the open source software, you have accepted that restriction. If you don't want to accept that restriction, don't use GPL software.
Does that mean GPL is not OSI?
No, it is both.
Oh, it is.
Right. I said there's a lot of overlap between the two, but it goes beyond the OSI requirements. The reason I put both GPL and LGPL up here is that a lot of people don't realize what the difference is between the two. The GPL says that if you take a software module and link it with another software module, that other software module must be GPL compatible. It doesn't mean it has to be licensed under the GPL, but it has to be licensed under the GPL compatible license. The Free Software Foundation actually does break their licenses into GPL compatible, GPL non-compatible. The LGPL has a clause in there that exempts runtime linkage. That means if I want to write a support library, a library that does math, I can license it under the LGPL, and you can use it in a non-GPL product. The Free Software Foundation actually recommends that you use the GPL for all products, whether they're licenses or applications. That's kind of a personal taste thing. They're concerned with freedom of software. I'm more concerned with people enjoying and being able to use what I put out there. I've licensed things, my libraries under the LGPL.